When it comes to building the strongest character in Haze Seas, your fruit is easily one of the biggest decisions you'll make. Some fruits completely dominate both grinding and PvP, while others are much more situational. So in this video, we're going to rank every single fruit and break down which ones are actually worth using. Whether you're trying to level up as fast as possible, melt bosses, or dominate other players, this tier list will help you figure out what deserves a spot in your build. Keep in mind that this is still a work in progress tier list, so rankings may change as we spend more time testing and comparing everything. I'll be looking at each fruit from both a PvE and PvP perspective, pointing out where they shine and where they fall short. So grab your favorite fruit, let me know if you agree with my rankings, and let's jump straight into the Haze Sea fruit tier list. I'm quickly moving on to the video and I'm ranking fruits in Haze Seas. Before we start, if you enjoy these types of list videos, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. Enjoy watching. The fruits in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right: Operation, Love, Mammoth, Smoke, Sand, Pour. Not every fruit in Haze Seas is destined for greatness, and these next picks are living proof that sometimes the treasure chest gives you disappointment instead of power. If you end up rolling one of these, do not panic, but also do not get too attached because there are much stronger options waiting for you. These fruits can still be fun to experiment with, but when it comes to climbing the ranks or clearing content efficiently, they struggle to keep up. Starting with Operation, this rare fruit simply does not bring enough damage to justify using it, and its abilities feel underwhelming in both player versus environment and player versus player. Love is another rare fruit that falls short because it never really excels at anything. Its damage is low, its area of effect attacks are unimpressive, and its utility is too limited to make up for those weaknesses. Mammoth lands in the same unfortunate category. Even though it sounds like it should be powerful, its overall damage, area of effect potential, and utility are all too weak compared to better choices. Smoke is another uncommon fruit that most players replace as soon as possible. It does not perform well in either player versus environment or player versus player, so while it can help during your first few adventures, it quickly becomes obvious that stronger fruits are worth chasing. Sand is slightly more forgiving because its low geo effect makes it a decent beginner option, but once you unlock better alternatives like Flame, Ice, Magma, or Darkness, there is very little reason to stick with it unless you are collecting fruits for fun. Then we have Pour, which is probably the closest thing to a maybe in this tier. It actually deals respectable damage in player versus environment, but its area of effect is far too limited, making it inefficient once you move beyond the early game. That means grinding larger groups of enemies becomes slower than it needs to be. So if one of these fruits is currently sitting in your inventory, do not feel personally attacked. We have all been there, pretending our fruit is secretly overpowered while reality keeps proving otherwise. The good news is that Haze Seas offers plenty of stronger fruits, and upgrading from any of these will make your journey noticeably smoother. The fruits in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right: Soul, Magnet, Light, Ice, Gas, Flame, Snow, Buddha, String, and Gravity. Now we are finally getting into the fruits that can actually carry their own weight. These are not game-breaking monsters, but they are reliable choices that can help you progress without feeling like you are fighting the game itself. If you are sitting on one of these fruits, you are in a pretty comfortable spot. They all have their own strengths, even if each comes with a flaw that keeps it out of the higher tiers. Let's start with Soul. This legendary fruit has massive area of effect attacks that make clearing groups of enemies in player versus environment feel incredibly satisfying. It also gives you some nice traversal mobility, letting you move around the world more easily. The downside is that it lacks movement options during actual combat, so while traveling feels smooth, fighting can feel a little less flexible. Magnet is another legendary fruit that shines in player versus environment thanks to its excellent damage output. It is a little slow compared to other fruits though, and that slower pace makes it noticeably weaker when facing real players in player versus player battles. Light is easily one of the best beginner-friendly fruits in the game. Its incredible mobility makes both traveling and player versus player fights much easier, and it still delivers impressive damage per second. Ice is another strong all-round option. It may not hit quite as hard as the fruits above it, but it still performs very well in player versus environment while remaining perfectly capable in player versus player. Gas tells a similar story. Its attacks have noticeable startup animations that make them easier for opponents to predict in player versus player, but when it comes to farming enemies in player versus environment, it is an excellent choice. Flame also deserves some attention. It provides solid damage, useful mobility, and is another fantastic fruit for newer players, even if it feels like a slightly weaker version of Magma. The uncommon fruits in this tier are surprisingly respectable. Snow is a fantastic early game grinding fruit, making it much easier for new players to level up without too much frustration. Buddha is another beginner-friendly option that gets the job done during the early stages of the game. That being said, you should definitely plan to replace it once stronger fruits become available because its performance starts to fall behind later on. String is one of the biggest hidden gems in this entire tier. Its mobility, both during combat and while exploring, is excellent, and although its area of effect is limited and its damage is not particularly high, it performs surprisingly well in player versus player. It is one of those fruits that deserves far more credit than it usually gets. Finally, we have Gravity. On paper, the damage is actually pretty decent, but the way it fights creates some frustrating problems. Many of its attacks push enemies away from you, making it harder to keep your combos going, and its meteor abilities are simply too slow to consistently land against experienced player versus player opponents. It is still a fun fruit to use, but compared to everything else in this tier, those weaknesses are enough to keep it from climbing any higher. Sometimes the biggest enemy is not low damage. It is watching your target casually walk away while your giant meteor is still deciding whether today is the day it wants to land. The fruits in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Magma, Venom, Shadow, Dawn, Shadow, Leopard, and Wolf. Now this is where the competition starts getting serious. Every fruit in the B tier is strong enough to carry you through a huge portion of the game, and picking any of them is rarely a bad decision. They may not completely dominate the meta, but they are powerful, reliable, and can absolutely make you look like you know what you are doing. If the higher tiers did not exist, plenty of players would happily stick with these all the way to the end. First up is Magma, and it is one of the most dependable player versus environment fruits you can get. It delivers excellent damage and feels very similar to Darkness in terms of overall power, although it cannot control crowds quite as effectively. Even with that limitation, Magma still offers solid mobility and remains one of the safest choices for players who spend most of their time farming enemies instead of fighting other players. Venom is another legendary fruit that deserves far more attention than it usually gets. It is honestly one of the most underrated player versus environment fruits in Haze Seas. If you are actively playing instead of relying on an idle grinding strategy, Venom can actually outperform Tremor in many situations. Shadow also earns its place here thanks to its quick area of effect attacks, making it excellent for clearing groups of enemies. On top of that, it performs well enough in player versus player to keep you competitive when someone decides to challenge you. The last two fruits, Leopard and Wolf, have a lot in common because both revolve around powerful transformation abilities. Leopard is not quite at the very top of the current meta, but it is still an outstanding alternative for player versus player. Its transformation gives you everything you need to pressure opponents while remaining perfectly capable in player versus environment. Wolf follows almost the exact same formula. Its transformed state makes it a dangerous choice in player versus player, while still offering respectable performance for grinding and general progression. This is probably one of the hardest tiers to rank because none of these fruits feel weak. The differences come down to small advantages rather than massive power gaps. Whether you prefer melting enemies with Magma, poisoning everything with Venom, striking from the shadows, or turning into a beast with Leopard or Wolf, you are getting a fruit that can comfortably handle almost anything Haze Seas throws at you. At this point, choosing your favorite playstyle matters almost as much as choosing the strongest fruit. The fruits in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Gum/Gear 4 and 5, Phoenix, Doe, Darkness, and Tremor. Once you reach the A tier, the conversation changes completely. These are the fruits that make people stop and ask, wait, how are they clearing everything so fast? Every option here is incredibly powerful, and the gap between A tier and S tier is much smaller than the gap between A tier and everything below it. In other words, if you own one of these fruits, you are already playing with some of the strongest tools Haze Seas has to offer. Let's start with Germ and its Gear 4th and Gear 5th forms. This mythical fruit has one of the highest ceilings in the game because Gear 5th has the potential to be one of the absolute best fruits available. The catch is that reaching that point takes time and investment. Before you unlock its full potential, the base form and Gear 4th feel noticeably weaker than the fruits it competes against. Even without receiving another rework though, it remains an extremely powerful choice that rewards players who are willing to stick with it. Phoenix is a completely different story. If player versus player is your main focus, this fruit is an absolute monster. When paired with Barkblade version 2, it becomes one of the strongest player versus player combinations in the game, easily competing for the #1 spot. Its fast dashes, mix-ups, and incredible combo potential make it a nightmare to fight against. While it can perform reasonably well in player versus environment, its true value comes from dominating other players. Do is another mythical powerhouse with incredible range, mobility, and damage. It is still an excellent player versus player fruit, but the S tier options either clear player versus environment content a little more efficiently or provide even stronger combo opportunities in competitive fights. Darkness proves that you do not need a mythical rarity to be one of the best fruits in the game. In fact, it is arguably the strongest non-mythical fruit for grinding. Depending on the situation and what fruits you have access to, it can even outperform some mythical options. The secret is its incredible area of effect damage combined with abilities that group enemies together, making farming faster, easier, and far more efficient than most other fruits can manage. Finally, there is Tremor, which has become a favorite for anyone who enjoys effortless farming. Its enormous area of effect attack can be used over and over again, making it one of the best fruits for automated or semi-automated grinding sessions. Watching entire groups of enemies disappear with almost no effort never gets old. At this stage of the tier list, there are no bad choices. The only real question is whether you want to dominate player versus environment, rule player versus player, or simply make everyone else wonder how you became so overpowered. The fruits in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Dragon, Electricity, and Okuchi, and here we are, the fruits that everyone hopes to pull but only a lucky few actually get. This is the S tier, where every fruit feels like it was designed to make the rest of the roster jealous. If one of these ends up in your inventory, congratulations, you have officially entered the part of Haze Seas where enemies disappear before they even have time to fight back. Dragon sits comfortably at the very top, and after its rework, it has earned that position. It even surpasses Gear 5th in overall strength, which says a lot considering how powerful Gear 5th already is. Dragon Hybrid and Full Form deliver enormous area of effect attacks with incredible damage, allowing you to wipe out groups of enemies with ease. On top of that, Dragon completely dominates player versus player thanks to what is arguably the strongest move spamming toolkit in the game. The only real downside is that its base form is noticeably weaker, and some of its hitboxes and movement can feel a little awkward at times. Even so, those flaws are nowhere near enough to knock it off the throne. If your goal is pure grinding efficiency, Electricity is arguably the king. This mythical fruit has one of the best base movesets in Haze Seas, meaning you do not have to wait for transformations before it starts carrying you. Its attacks are incredibly fast, hit extremely hard, cover huge areas, and reach enemies from impressive distances. That combination makes farming feel almost effortless. It is also no slouch in player versus player, where its quick attacks let you pressure opponents by constantly throwing out powerful abilities. Okuchi rounds out the S tier as another outstanding transformation fruit. It shines brightest in player versus player, where its transformed state gives you everything you need to overwhelm your opponents. In player versus environment, its abilities are slightly weaker than Dragon's, but the full form transformation closes that gap considerably and still delivers fantastic results. There are even certain player versus player situations where Phoenix might perform a little better, but when you look at the complete package, Okuchi remains one of the strongest and most consistent fruits in the entire game. The biggest difference between these three fruits is not whether they are powerful, they all are. Instead, it comes down to what kind of experience you want. Dragon offers unmatched overall dominance, Electricity provides the fastest and smoothest grinding experience, and Okuchi delivers an incredibly balanced mix of transformation power and competitive performance. None of them will leave you feeling underpowered, and every one of them is worthy of the mythical rarity. That wraps up the entire Haze Seas fruit tier list. Of course, your own playstyle can always change how strong a fruit feels, and a skilled player can make almost anything work. But if your goal is to grind faster, win more player versus player battles, and invest your resources into the fruits with the highest long-term value, these rankings should give you a solid roadmap. Now the only challenge left is getting lucky enough for the game to actually give you one of these S-tier monsters instead of another fruit that belongs at the bottom of the list. The video ends here. See you in another video. Don't forget to subscribe.